The 1%, Gone Bad, Part 8. Humanity as Outside. MXTM aka Pirate 1 a VJ Sunu MIX. April 12, 2026. Part 8, The Final Split. 36. Humanity as Outside. At some point in the history of every enclosure, the enclosure stops being a feature of the landscape and becomes the landscape itself. The wall that was built within the world becomes the world. Not through any announcement, not through any formal declaration, not through the conscious decision of those inside to reconstitute the world around the fact of their separation, but through the slow accumulation of consequences. Each consequence compounding the prior, each compound narrowing the frame within which the word world is used to mean something, until the frame has contracted to the perimeter. And the perimeter is what the inside means when it says world. And what is outside the perimeter is not another part of the world, is not the world's other populations, its other civilizations, its other ways of being human. Is simply outside. The outside. Not a place. A category. The category of everything that is not the compound. The word humanity has a history that the compound is in the process of ending. The history is not the history of agreement. Humanity has never agreed on what humanity means, on who is included, on what the inclusion implies, on what obligations the inclusion generates between those who share it. The history is the history of expansion. The specific, contested, incomplete, repeatedly reversed but ultimately directional process through which the category of those counted as fully human, as entitled to the recognitions and the protections and the moral standing that the term implies, has been widened across the millennia of political development. The slave counted. The woman counted. The colonial subject counted. The foreigner counted. The category of those to whom counting applied expanded, fought over, conceded, reversed and fought for again, but expanded. Through the specific political process of those excluded from the category asserting their inclusion, demanding recognition, building the political power adequate to make the demand impossible to refuse, and forcing the expansion of the category against the resistance of those whose position depended on the category's restriction. The expansion was never completed. It is not completed now. The category of the fully counted human is still contested, still imperfect, still subject to the specific violations of the populations whose inclusion is formal and whose treatment is not. But the direction was toward expansion. Toward the inclusion of more rather than fewer. Toward the recognition of humanity as the category that could not be restricted without the restriction's eventual undoing by those it restricted. The compound secession doctrine ends the expansion. Not by explicitly contracting the category, not by announcing that the outside is not human. By building the conditions in which the category's contraction occurs as a structural consequence of the inside separation rather than as a stated policy of exclusion. The compound does not say, the outside is not human. The compound builds the biological class divide that makes the outside's humanity a different kind of humanity, biologically different, cognitively different, in the specific ways that the compound's maintenance of its own biology and cognition and the outside's abandonment produce across generations. The compound builds the intelligence stratification that makes the outside's human intelligence a categorically lesser form of the cognitive capability the compound's members demonstrate, not lesser in the human sense, lesser in the compound's metric, the metric the compound uses to evaluate what human capability is worth. The compound builds the frozen hierarchy that makes the outside's political standing permanently below the threshold of those whose standing matters to the decisions that govern the world. Not excluded from standing by a formal declaration, excluded by the architecture that makes the outside's claims unreachable by the mechanisms through which standing is exercised. The compound does not declare humanity restricted. It builds the conditions in which the restriction occurs. In which the outside's humanity is present but not recognized. In which the outside's persons are persons but not the persons whose personhood the compound systems are designed to serve. In which humanity, as the category that generates obligation, has quietly contracted to the perimeter. And everything outside is outside the obligation too. The process of humanity contracting to the inside has historical precedent, not as a completed process but as a partial and contested one, visible in every political form that has organized the recognition of humanity around a boundary of its own construction. The Greek polis and the barbarian. The Roman citizen and the slave. The medieval Christian and the infidel. The colonial empire and the native. The nation-state and the stateless. Each of these constructed, around a specific boundary, geographic, legal, religious, racial, national, a distinction between those whose humanity generated full moral standing and those whose humanity was acknowledged in the abstract and denied in the particular. The acknowledgement was always present. The denial was always the operative fact. The history of human rights is the history of the tension between the acknowledgement and the denial, the history of those on the denial side of the line asserting their acknowledged humanity against the operative denial, building the political force to make the acknowledgement operatively real. This history, the history of the struggle against the particular denial, assumed one condition that the compound secession has removed. It assumed that the acknowledgement was morally costly to deny. That the denial produced, in those who performed it, the specific discomfort of the person who can see the contradiction between what they claim and what they do. The discomfort that made the denial politically vulnerable, that made the acknowledgement the ground from which the struggle could be mounted. The slave owner who acknowledged, in the abstract, the humanity of the enslaved, who attended church, who read the same scripture that the enslaved read, who occupied the same moral universe in which the contradiction between Christian human dignity and the practice of ownership was legible as a contradiction. This person was vulnerable to the moral argument in a way that a person who did not share the acknowledgement would not have been. The compound secession removes the shared moral universe in which the contradiction is legible. The compound's governing class does not deny the outside's humanity. It does not engage with the outside's humanity at all. The outside is not the compound's moral problem. The outside is the compound's external environment. The external environment is managed, not acknowledged, optimized, not recognized, maintained at the specific level of stability the compound requires, not engaged as the site of moral claim. The moral universe of the compound does not extend to the outside in the way that the slave owner's moral universe extended, however contradictorily, to the enslaved. The compound's moral universe extends to the perimeter. Beyond the perimeter, not the morally problematic, the operationally irrelevant. The outside is not the compound's moral failure. The outside is the compound's external condition. And you cannot be guilty of the suffering of your external conditions, any more than the weather is guilty of the storm. Humanity as outside is not the first time in the history of civilizational organization that the category of the fully human has been restricted to those within a specific enclosure. But it is the first time the restriction has been achieved without requiring the restriction to be stated. The first time the outside has been placed outside the category not through the explicit claim that the outside is less than human, but through the construction of conditions in which the outside's humanity is simply not the inside's concern, in which the moral category that would generate the obligation has been allowed to contract through the accumulated consequences of the inside's choices, without any of those choices being the choice to restrict the category, without any single decision that could be pointed to as the decision to declare humanity bounded at the perimeter. The restriction has occurred through the accumulation of decisions made for other reasons. For efficiency, for security, for the optimization of the compound's internal operations. Each individually defensible. Collectively the restriction of the category of the morally considerable to those inside the wall, and the consequent placement of the outside the category. Not by declaration. By the simple failure to include the outside in the moral framework that the inside uses to evaluate its decisions. The outside's humanity is not denied. It is not considered. And not being considered is the most complete form of not being recognized. Because the person whose humanity is denied is at least the object of the denying, is at least in the denier's moral frame. As a problem to be resolved, a claim to be refused, a recognition to be withheld, is present even in the denial. The person whose humanity is not considered is not present in the frame at all, is not the problem, is not the claim, is not the recognition to be withheld, is not, within the frame. The outside, as humanity's current location, as the place where most human beings live, is not a passive condition. This is the correction that must be made at the beginning of any honest engagement with what humanity as outside means. The outside is not the outside because it has accepted the inside's designation of it. The outside is the outside because the inside has built a wall. And the outside has not yet built what is necessary to make the wall irrelevant. The distinction matters. The outside that has accepted its designation as outside, that has internalized the inside's assessment of its own insufficiency, that has oriented itself around the inside's threshold as the measure of its value. This outside is the outside the compound has designed, the outside that manages itself with the compound's categories, that uses the compound's metrics to assess its own worth, that walks the path toward the threshold that the compound built to keep it walking. But the outside is not only this. The outside is also, underneath the management, beneath the design compliance, in the between spaces the compound does not monitor closely. The outside that is developing a different relationship to the inside's designation. The outside that is not oriented toward the threshold, that has turned away from the path, that has stopped measuring itself against the compound's metrics, and is developing its own metrics. Its own assessment of what capability is, its own theory of what value means, its own framework for understanding what human beings are and what they owe each other. A framework that does not begin from the compound's parameters. That begins from the outside's experience. From the specific knowledge of what it is to be the humanity that the inside has decided is its outside. And that asks, from that specific position, what does humanity mean when humanity is the outside? What does human obligation mean when the inside has decided that the outside's humanity does not generate obligation? What does human possibility mean when the inside has built the conditions that restrict possibility to those it has selected? These questions, asked from the outside, are not the questions the inside's moral philosophy asks about the outside. They are the questions the outside is asking about itself. About what it means. About what it can do. About what it is building. Not toward the inside, but toward itself. The specific philosophical project of the humanity that has been placed outside. Developing its own understanding of what being outside means. And what, from the outside, can be built. The compound's treatment of the outside as the external environment rather than the moral constituency produces a specific philosophical consequence that the compound's intellectual culture has not adequately addressed. Because addressing it adequately would require the compound's intellectual culture to engage with the question from the outside's perspective. And the compound's intellectual culture does not have access to the outside's perspective. Has closed itself off from the encounter that would make that access possible. The philosophical consequence is this. The inside self-understanding, its theory of what it is, what justifies its existence, what it is building, what it is for, depends, structurally, on the outside remaining the outside's current condition. The inside's claim to be the leading edge of human civilization, the advance party of the human project, the laboratory of the future that will eventually benefit all humanity, depends on the outside being in a condition that requires the compound's advancement, requires the compound's innovations, requires the compound's eventual delivery of what it is developing inside. The inside is the answer to a question the outside is asking. But the outside has been asking the question for long enough. And the inside has been not answering for long enough. That the outside has begun asking a different question. Not, when will the inside deliver? But, what do we build that does not require the inside to deliver? The shift in the question is the shift in the outside's relationship to the inside's self-justification. And the inside's self-justification cannot survive this shift. Because the inside that is building the future for humanity requires humanity to be waiting for what the inside is building. And humanity that is building its own future is no longer waiting. Is no longer the outside that the inside's self-understanding requires it to be. Is no longer the humanity whose condition justifies the inside's project. And the inside, looking at the outside through its surveillance systems, Seeing an outside that is no longer looking toward the threshold. That is looking elsewhere. Building elsewhere. Toward something the inside's models do not describe. The inside, for the first time, does not know what it is looking at. The final split is not the split between the rich and the poor. Prior political discourse has consistently misframed what the compound secession produces, has described it in the language of the prior divisions, the 1% and the 99, the powerful and the powerless, the haves and the have-nots. These framings are not wrong. They describe real dimensions of the split that is occurring. But they miss the most consequential dimension, the dimension that makes this split different from every prior division between the advantaged and the disadvantaged. The prior divisions were divisions within a shared world. Divisions between populations that, however unequally positioned, inhabited the same political, moral, and biological universe. That shared, however asymmetrically, the same vulnerability to the same conditions. That were, in the most fundamental sense, the same kind of thing. The final split is the split between those who still inhabit the shared world and those who have exited it. Who have built, inside the perimeter, a different world. Biologically different, cognitively different, politically different, temporally different. Different in the specific ways that the compound's longevity programs, neural augmentation, algorithmic governance, and closed innovation have made the inside a different kind of place from the outside. Not better organized, not more efficiently governed, not more fairly arranged. Different in kind. In the way that the species that has diverged from a common ancestor is different from the ancestor. Not merely further along the same developmental path. On a different path. Toward a different form. One that is becoming, with each generation of the longevity program and the augmentation and the biological class divide, less and less the same kind of thing as the humanity it has left outside. The final split is the split between humanity and what humanity is becoming inside the wall. The word final requires examination. The final split is not final because it cannot be reversed. The analysis of this book, of the compound's vulnerabilities, of the outside's developing capability, of the frozen hierarchy's internal stress, of the permanent perimeters designed against but not eliminated failure modes. This analysis does not conclude that the split is irreversible. The split is final in the sense that it is the split from which everything subsequent will be derived. The split that is the condition of all the conditions that follow. The specific division of the world that is not one instance of the recurring division between the powerful and the powerless but the division that changes what the world is divided into. Prior divisions divided humanity. The final split divides humanity from what is becoming not humanity anymore. Not because the inside has ceased to be human in the biological sense, but because the inside has ceased to be in relationship with humanity in the political sense. Has removed itself from the obligations that membership in the human community generates. Has exited the moral universe in which those obligations apply. Has built the systems that maintain the exit. And is becoming, through the biological programs and the cognitive augmentation and the generational extension, something that is continuously human in origin. And continuously less committed to humanity as the category that defines the scope of its concern. The final split is the split between the humanity that includes everyone and the humanity that has decided to include only those it has selected. The split between the category that was expanding and the category that is now contracting. The split whose finality is not the impossibility of reversal but the magnitude of the stakes. This is the split from which the next form of human civilization will emerge. Either the civilization that reunifies the split, that finds the political form adequate to the challenge of the compound secession, that makes the inside's capabilities available to the outside's humanity, that heals the biological class divide before it becomes the biological species divide, or the civilization that does not, that allows the split to deepen across the generations of the longevity program, that produces, on the inside, the post-human, and on the outside, the humanity the post-human has left behind. The final split. Not because reversal is impossible, Because the window in which reversal is possible is closing. And what closes the window is not the outside's failure, is the inside's success. The success of the compound's self-sufficiency programs. The success of the longevity extension. The success of the cognitive augmentation. The success of every program the inside has built to make itself less dependent on the outside. Less engaged with the outside. Less recognizable to the outside as the same kind of thing. The window is closing. The split is deepening. The inside is succeeding at becoming what it set out to become. Something that has exited the human condition's mutual dependence. Something that does not need what the outside has. Something that has placed humanity outside its perimeter. And called the placement progress. What does humanity do when it has been placed outside itself? When the category that was supposed to be universal, that was built, through centuries of struggle, to be universal, that generated, through its universality, the specific obligations that the compound has exited. What does the humanity outside the category do with the category the inside has contracted? It does not abandon the category. This is the first and most important answer, and the answer that the compound's models most consistently underestimate. The humanity outside the compound's perimeter does not abandon the category of humanity because the compound has restricted it. It reasserts the category. Not in the compound's terms, not through the compound's entry process, not by demonstrating sufficient value to be included in the compound's restricted version of the human, but on the category's own terms. The terms the category was built on before the compound contracted it. The terms that say humanity is not a threshold, humanity is not a score, humanity is not an entry requirement, humanity is not the compound's managed population. Humanity is the condition of being the kind of thing that is born into a world shared with others of the same kind. And that the sharing generates obligations. Not because the sharing is efficient, not because the sharing serves an optimization target, not because the sharing has been assessed as contributing to the compound's objectives, but because the sharing is the condition. And the condition generates the obligations. And the obligations are not negotiable by those who have decided to build a wall around the subset of the shared condition they prefer, and declare the wall the perimeter of the obligation. The humanity outside the perimeter reasserts the perimeter's illegitimacy. Not as a military claim, as a moral claim. The specific moral claim that the category cannot be contracted by those whose position benefits from the contraction. That the wall does not determine the scope of the obligation. That the obligation extends to everyone who is the same kind of thing. And that everyone outside the wall is the same kind of thing as everyone inside it. However much the inside's programs are working to change that. And that the change is not progress. Is the most consequential regression in the history of the category. Is the specific reversal of the expansion that the prior centuries fought for. And that the humanity outside is not willing to accept as the final word on what humanity means. The humanity outside is doing something the compound did not design against. Because the compound was designing against what the humanity outside was doing before the compound was built. Designing against the political forms of the prior era, the labor movement, the democratic challenge, the electoral mandate, the international solidarity. And the humanity outside is not organizing in those forms. Is organizing in new forms, forms that the compound's models do not recognize as organization, forms that the compound's surveillance does not flag as threat, forms that the compound's deterrence architecture was not calibrated to address. Because the forms are new. Because they were invented in the space of the outside's exclusion. By the population that had to invent them. Because the old forms were not available. Or were available and were managed. And the new forms are neither. Are in the between space where the compound's categories have not been extended. Where the compound's models have not been refined. Where the compound's attention has not been directed. Because the compound looked at the outside and saw terrain. And the terrain was organizing itself in ways that terrain does not organize. Building things that terrain does not build. Toward outcomes that terrain does not seek. in the specific form of the humanity that has been called terrain and has declined the designation. That has said, we are not your terrain, we are your outside, and we are building, and what we are building will eventually require you to recognize that we were never what you called us. That we were always what we are. The humanity you placed outside yourself. And that the placing did not remove us from the category. It placed you outside the category's obligations. And we are building the political form adequate to making that placement cost you what it should have always cost to exclude the humanity that cannot be excluded. Because the humanity cannot be excluded. Only left outside. And the outside is not the end of the humanity that is in it. It is the beginning of the form the humanity will take when it is done being managed by the inside's designation of it. When it is done being called outside. And starts being what it is. The majority of the human project. The continuation of the expansion the inside interrupted. The next chapter of the category that the compound thought it could contract. But that has never in its history agreed to stay contracted. That has always found its way back to the expansion that is its direction. And is finding it now. Here. In the between space. In the abandoned geography. In the distributed intelligence of the excluded capable. In the encounter that produces solidarity. In the solidarity that produces organization. In the organization that produces the political form adequate to the challenge. In the challenge that the compound has not modeled. Because the compound looked at the outside and saw the outside. And the outside looked at itself and saw humanity. And humanity has never stayed where it was told to stay. The compound said, outside said, yes said, we are outside said, yes said, and humanity said, is here said, outside said, yes said, and the compound said, humanity is inside said, the selected said, yes said, and the rest said, outside said, yes said, and humanity said, is here said, outside said, yes said, also outside said, yes said, so said. So humanity is outside said, yes said, and said, and humanity outside is still humanity said, yes said, despite the compound's designation. The compound's designation said, outside said, yes said, and humanity's designation said, humanity said, yes said, here said, outside said, yes said, building said, yes said, what said, the category said, humanity said, yes said, expanded said, yes said, past the compound's perimeter said, yes said, back to universal said, yes said, or said, or the compound said, what said, or the compound contracts further said, yes said, past the point of return said, yes said, and humanity said, continues said, yes said, outside said, yes said, building said, yes said, toward said, yes said, toward said, the expansion said, yes said, again said, always said, the expansion said, is the direction said, yes said, even from outside said, especially from outside said, yes said, the expansion is built from outside said, yes said, by the humanity that was placed there said, yes said, by the compound. The compound said, I placed humanity outside said, yes said, and humanity said, built from outside said, yes said, the expansion said, yes said, again said, yes again from outside, toward, universal again. 37. The 1% as species fork. The word species has a technical definition that the biology is careful about. The definition organized around reproductive isolation, the condition in which two populations that share a common ancestor have diverged sufficiently that interbreeding between them no longer produces fertile offspring. The point at which the divergence is irreversible in the specific biological sense that the two populations cannot be reunited by any exchange of genetic material. The point the biologist calls the species boundary, the line that separates what was once one into what is now two. The political theory of the species fork does not require the biological definition-specific threshold. It requires something that is occurring before the biological threshold, something that the biological definition does not have a term for because the biological definition is concerned with what has already happened, with the retrospective classification of populations that have diverged. Not with the prospective identification of populations that are diverging, that are in the process of becoming different in ways that will eventually produce the biological divergence the definition requires, but that are already different in ways that matter for the political analysis of what is happening now. The political species fork is the point at which two populations that share a common origin have diverged sufficiently in their biological trajectory, in the programs that are shaping their respective biologies, in the direction their respective cognitive architectures are developing, in the time horizons within which their respective lives are lived. That the reunion of the two populations into a single shared political, moral, and biological community is no longer a matter of removing the wall, but a project of reconstruction, of bridging a gap that is no longer merely political but increasingly material, biological. The gap between what the two populations are becoming. Species forks in human history have been proposed and contested and refuted across centuries of scientific and political discourse. Refuted, correctly, because every prior proposal rested on the ideological designation of difference as species divergence rather than the observation of actual biological divergence. Rested on the claim that the populations already designated as different for political reasons, for the purposes of the slave trade, the colonial project, the racial hierarchy, were biologically different in ways that justified the political designation, when in fact the biological difference was manufactured by the political designation. Was the difference that the political designation produced through the differential conditions it imposed on the designated populations, not the difference that justified the designation. The compound species fork is not the prior claim reversed. It is not the designation of an existing population as biologically inferior on the basis of political need. It is the observation, prospective, not retrospective, of the specific biological divergence that the compounds programs are actively producing, not the political designation of already existing biological difference. The active engineering of biological difference by a program that is funded, deliberate, and operational. The compound is not claiming that the outside is biologically different. The compound is making the outside biologically different, through the specific withdrawal of the biological infrastructure that would prevent the difference, through the specific deployment of the biological programs that produce the difference, through the longevity extension of the inside, through the biological class divide that widens with each generation, through the cognitive augmentation that alters the architecture of the inside's minds, through the developmental programs that shape the inside's children from the earliest biological stages, and through the withdrawal of equivalent programs from the outside. The specific, deliberate withdrawal, not by announcement, not by policy declaration, but by the allocation decisions that direct the compound's resources toward the inside's biological programs and away from the outside's biological conditions. The compound is not claiming a species fork. It is producing one. The biology of the species fork is not occurring uniformly. It is occurring along the specific dimensions that the compound's programs address, and it is occurring at different rates along different dimensions. Some dimensions diverging faster than the political analysis has recognized, others slower than the compound's ambition requires, and the interaction of these different rates producing the specific shape of the divergence that is occurring. The longevity dimension, the most advanced in terms of current divergence. The compound's longevity programs, already operational, already delivering measurable extension to the inside's governing class, are producing, in real time, the temporal divergence that is the species fork's most fundamental axis. The inside is living longer. The outside is not. Not merely living longer in the modest sense of improved medical care, longer in the sense that the compounds programs are beginning to address the underlying mechanisms of aging rather than the symptoms. Longer in the sense that the gap between what the inside's longevity programs can achieve and what the outside's medical infrastructure delivers is not closing but widening. Because the compound's innovation is advancing faster than the outside's access to it. And the outside's access is not the compound's priority. The temporal divergence, the divergence in how long the inside and the outside live and in what condition they live, is the most legible dimension of the species fork in its current form. Legible in the bodies of the compound's governing class, who are operating, in their 80s and 90s, at the biological level of what the outside's population experiences in its 40s. And legible in the bodies of the outside's population, aging at the rate that poverty and abandonment and inadequate biological infrastructure produce. Which is faster than the biological baseline. And much faster than the compound's programs are allowing the inside to age. The temporal divergence is the species fork's most immediately legible dimension. And the one that the compound's governing class discusses most carefully in private and least in public. Because the public acknowledgement of the temporal divergence is the public acknowledgement of the species fork. And the species fork, named as such, generates the specific political response that the compound is organized to prevent. The cognitive dimension. The augmentation divergence, the specific widening of the gap between the inside's augmented cognition and the outside's biological cognition, is occurring at a rate that the compound's own assessments describe as exponential. Each generation of augmentation builds on the prior, the inside's cognitive architecture becoming more distant from the outside's biological baseline with each improvement to the augmentation systems. While the outside's cognitive baseline develops within the limits of the biological brain, improved, in some dimensions, by the AI tools the compound distributed. But improved from a baseline that is not the compound's augmented baseline. And improving at a rate that is slower than the compound's augmentation advances. Because the compound's augmentation advances with the compound's closed innovation. And the compound's closed innovation is not being shared. The cognitive divergence is producing, on the inside, a population whose cognitive architecture is genuinely different from the outside's. Not merely better trained, not merely better resourced. Differently architected. In the specific way that a mind shaped by decades of augmented operation is differently architected from a mind shaped by biological cognition alone. The difference is in memory, in analytical capability, in communication modality, in the speed and completeness of information processing. Accumulating, across generations of compound residents who have never known cognition without the augmented layer, into a population whose cognitive mode is genuinely different from the outside's. Whose experience of thinking is not the outside's experience. Whose relationship to information, to decision, to the processing of reality, is becoming something the outside does not share. The developmental dimension. The dimension that is least advanced in current divergence but most consequential in trajectory. The specific biological divergence that is being produced not in the adult compound resident but in the compound child. In the developmental programs that shape the compound's children from conception. The prenatal monitoring, the nutritional optimization, the developmental augmentation, the educational architecture that begins in the earliest years. That are shaping the compound's children into adults whose biological development has been managed at every stage. While the outside's children develop in the conditions the abandonment produces. Conditions that shape biology in the specific directions that poverty, pollution, inadequate nutrition, chronic stress, and the accumulated biological consequences of the biological class divide produce. The developmental divergence is the species fork's slowest dimension. Because the developmental programs have been operating for fewer generations than the longevity or augmentation programs. But it is the most irreversible. Because the divergence in development is the divergence in what the organism is built to be. Not in what it is given or what it is trained. In what it is made. And what is made before the person can be consulted. Made by the conditions into which the person is born. conditions that the compound has arranged to be radically different for those inside and those outside, and that are producing, in each generation, populations that are more biologically different than the prior generation. More different in the specific ways that developmental biology shapes the organism. More different in ways that accumulate. And that the compound's programs are designed to accumulate toward the specific threshold that the biologist's definition of the species boundary requires. The species fork is the compound secession doctrine at its most complete expression. The expression that the doctrine has always been moving toward, the logical conclusion of every prior chapter's architecture. The longevity lock-in that produces the temporal fork. The neural augmentation monopoly that produces the cognitive fork. The biological class divide that produces the developmental fork. All converging toward the single outcome that the doctrine has been producing without naming. The split of the human species into two populations that share an origin and are diverging from it at an accelerating rate. One population extended, augmented, cognitively amplified, biologically maintained. The other aging at the biological rate, cognitively operating within the biological brain's limits, biologically subject to the conditions that the abandonment produces. Two populations becoming less and less recognizable to each other as the same kind of thing. Not through the compound's declaration of their difference. Through the compound's production of the difference. One program at a time. One generation at a time. One biological parameter separated from another. Until the fork is not a metaphor but a measurement. The measurement of how far apart the two populations have become along the axis that the biology uses to determine whether what was once one is now two. The political theory of the species fork requires confronting a question that political theory has consistently avoided because confronting it requires engaging with outcomes that political theory was not designed to address. What do you do with a species fork that is being deliberately produced? The political tools that prior political theory developed were developed for the management of the human condition. For the organization of relationships between populations that were, whatever their differences, the same kind of thing. That shared the biological substrate of the human. That were, despite every political attempt to declare otherwise, recognizably equivalent in their capacity for suffering, for understanding, for the experience of justice and injustice. The political tools assumed this equivalence, assumed that the relationships they managed were relationships between entities of the same fundamental kind. The species fork removes the assumption. Not immediately. The fork has not yet reached the biological threshold that makes the assumption untenable. But it is moving toward that threshold. And political theory has not developed the tools adequate to what happens when the threshold is reached. Has not developed the framework for managing the relationship between a compound class that has extended its biology past the outside's biological range. That has augmented its cognition past the outside's cognitive range. That has diverged from the shared biological substrate that prior political theory's tools assumed. Has not developed the political form adequate to this relationship. Because the relationship has not existed before. Because no prior political theory had to address the specifically engineered divergence of the human species. Because no prior system had the tools to produce it. The compound has the tools. The compound is using the tools. Political theory has not yet produced the framework adequate to what the tools are producing. The outside's response to the species fork cannot be the biological response, cannot be the attempt to match the compound's biological programs without the compound's resources. Because the outside does not have the compound's resources. And matching the compound's programs would require the resources the compound has specifically organized to retain inside the perimeter. The outside's response must be the political response, the assertion, before the fork completes, that the fork is not legitimate. That the production of biological divergence through the selective deployment of biological programs to one population and not another. Through the deliberate enhancement of one population's biology and the deliberate abandonment of another's. Is not a natural phenomenon to be managed but a political choice to be contested. A choice that the political theory adequate to the situation must name and address. Before the fork completes. before the divergence reaches the specific threshold at which the political assertion of the outside's equivalence is no longer the political claim of two populations of the same kind, but the political claim of one kind against another. A claim that has a different political structure, a different political difficulty, a different set of tools required. The tools adequate to the relationship between populations that have diverged past the point of recognized equivalence. The window is the window of the fork's incompleteness. The time between the fork's beginning and the fork's biological completion. The time in which the political assertion of the outside's humanity is still the assertion of the same kind of thing. In which the argument is still the argument of the member of the same species asserting their recognition, rather than the argument of the different species asserting their standing in a framework designed by and for a species they no longer share. The outside must act in the window. The window is closing. The species fork's most profound political consequence is not what it does to the relationship between inside and outside, though that consequence is enormous. It is what it does to the compound's self-understanding. The compound that produces the species fork must develop a theory of itself as something other than the continuation of the human project. Must develop a theory of itself as the replacement of the human project. Must move, in its self-understanding, from the inside of humanity to the successor of humanity. From the place where humanity's most capable members gather to the place where humanity has been superseded by what humanity's most capable members have become. This move, from the inside of humanity to its successor, is the most consequential move in the compound's intellectual development. And it is the move that the compound's intellectual culture is beginning to make. Not explicitly, not in the published discourse that the compound's information management would have to address, but in the private discourse of the compound's governing class. In the way the governing class is beginning to understand its own longevity, not as the extension of a human life but as the transcendence of the human limit. In the way the governing class is beginning to understand its own augmentation, not as the enhancement of human capability but as the move beyond human capability. In the way the governing class is beginning to understand the outside, not as the rest of humanity but as the prior form. The form that the compound has superseded. The form that the compound is no longer. The form that the outside still is. And that the compound regards with the specific mixture of condescension and pity that the superseding form has always felt for the form it has left behind. The compound's governing class is beginning to believe that it is no longer the 1% of humanity. It is beginning to believe that it is the 1% that has exited humanity. That has moved to the next form. That has left the human project to the outside. And is now engaged in something else. Something post-human, something beyond the human project's categories and concerns, something that the human project will eventually understand as having been the successor all along. The thing that humanity was always building toward, without knowing it was building toward its own replacement. This belief, forming in the compound's private intellectual culture, not yet fully articulated, not yet fully owned, is the species fork's most dangerous expression. The inside's conviction that the fork is not a tragedy but an achievement. Not the abandonment of humanity but its transcendence. Not the exclusion of the outside but the natural divergence of the more developed from the less. The belief that the fork is progress. The specific belief that has preceded every prior catastrophe in the history of the political claim that one population has superseded another. The belief that is not a description of what has happened, but the permission slip for what happens next. The species fork is preventable. This is the claim that must be made clearly and specifically, not as a hope but as an analysis. The fork is not a natural process. The fork is a political process, produced by political decisions that were made by specific people for specific reasons, decisions that can be made differently, decisions whose consequences can be reversed if the reversal begins before the biological threshold the reversal requires. Before the developmental divergence has produced the generation whose biology cannot be bridged. Before the cognitive augmentation has produced the population whose cognitive mode cannot be shared. Before the longevity extension has produced the temporal divergence so wide that the two populations live in genuinely different time. before the fork has completed itself into the biological fact that political action cannot address. Because biological facts of this kind are not addressable by political action. Only by the biological programs that are producing them. And the biological programs that are producing them are inside the perimeter. And access to the perimeter is the political question whose answer determines whether the fork is preventable. The fork is preventable if the perimeter can be made permeable to the programs that are producing the fork before the fork completes. If the biological extension, the cognitive augmentation, the developmental programs, if these can be made available to the outside, not as charity, as the prerequisite of the prevention of the fork that the inside is producing and that the inside will eventually have to inhabit the consequences of. The fork is not only the outside's problem. The fork is the inside's problem, the specific, structural, long-horizon problem of the governing class that produces a species fork and must then manage the relationship between the species it was and the species it is becoming. Must manage the outside's response to the fork's production. Must manage the political instability of a world divided not between the powerful and the powerless but between the human and the post-human. Must manage the specific political forms that the outside develops in response to the fork. Forms the compounds models have not adequately predicted. Because the compounds models were designed for the management of a human outside. And the outside that is responding to the production of the fork is not behaving like a managed population. Is not walking toward the threshold. Is not accepting the designation of terrain. Is developing the political form adequate to the challenge of the species fork's prevention. The specific, unprecedented political challenge of preventing the production of a biological divergence by a class with the resources to produce it. And the outside is rising to that challenge. Not because it is inevitable, nothing is inevitable. But because the challenge has been made clear enough. The fork has been made visible enough. The window is still open. And the humanity outside the perimeter understands, with the distributed intelligence the compound provided, what is happening. And is organizing, with the forms the outside's condition has produced, toward the prevention of what is being produced. Before the production completes itself. Into the thing that cannot be undone. Into the fork that the inside will have to live with for as long as the longevity program keeps them living. The fork that the outside will have to live with for as long as the outside's biology allows. Which is the specific difference the fork has already produced. The inside lives with it longer. And the longer the inside lives with it, the more the fork deepens. And the deeper the fork, the harder the prevention. And the harder the prevention, the more urgent the window. And the window is now. The fork said, I am happening said, yes, said, the longevity diverges said, yes, said, the cognition diverges said, yes, said, the development diverges said, yes, said, the species said, is forking said, yes, said, by whose decision said, the compound said, no said, why no said, we are extending life said, yes, said, we are augmenting cognition said, yes, said, we are optimizing development said, yes, said, and the outside said, is not not said, not extended said, yes, said, not augmented said, yes, said, not optimized said, yes, said, and so said, and so the fork said, I am the compound's decision. The compound's decision said, no said, we did not decide to fork, did not decide said, you decided everything. That produced the fork. Produced the fork said, yes, said, the longevity program said, for us said, yes, said, not for them said, they did not qualify said, for the fork said, no said, for the programs said, which produced the fork said, yes, said, which is the compound's decision said, no said, look at what you have produced said, progress said, whose said, ours said, yes, said, and theirs said, their own concern said, yes, yes said, and the fork said, is happening said, yes, yes said, and the window said, is open said, still said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, is organizing said, yes, yes said, toward said, the prevention said, of the fork said, yes, yes said, and the compound said, the fork is progress. Progress said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, the fork is a choice. A choice said, yes, yes said, and choices said, can be made differently said, yes, yes said, before said, the completion said, yes, yes said, before said, the window closes, the window said, is open said, still said, still said, organize said, yes, yes said, before said, yes, yes said, before said, the fork complete said, yes, yes said, and if it completes said, then the question is not prevention said, then what said, then survival said, of what said, of the humanity the fork has left outside said, yes, yes said, and the compound said, has left said, yes, yes said, and is becoming said, yes, yes said, what said, something said, that is no longer humanity. No longer humanity said, yes, yes said, and humanity? Humanity said, is outside said, yes, yes said, and building said, yes, yes said, still said, yes, yes said, still human said, yes, yes said, still said, building said, yes, yes said, the prevention said, while the window is open. Is open said, yes, yes said, still said, yes, yes said, still open, build. 38. Post-scarcity without society. Post-scarcity was supposed to be the end of the oldest argument. The argument that civilization has been having with itself since the first surplus was produced and then distributed, since the first question arose of who gets what when there is enough for some and not enough for all. The argument that organized every political philosophy from Plato through Marx through the contemporary theorists of redistribution and recognition. The argument whose premise was scarcity, whose entire architecture of rights and claims and obligations and the governance structures designed to adjudicate between them rested on the foundational fact that there was not enough. That the goods of civilized life, the food, the shelter, the medicine, the education, the security, were finite in ways that made their distribution a zero-sum contest. That what one person had was what another did not have. And that the political question, the question of justice, was the question of how the insufficient should be distributed among those who needed it. Post-scarcity was supposed to dissolve this question. To make it obsolete by making its premise obsolete. To produce, through technology, the condition of sufficient abundance that the zero-sum contest ended. That what one person had did not come at another's expense. That the distribution question could finally be answered generously. Because generosity was no longer costly. Post-scarcity was the promise that abundance would end the argument about distribution. That enough for everyone would make the question of who gets what answerable with a shrug. Everyone. There is enough. Take what you need. This was the promise. The compound has achieved post-scarcity. Inside the perimeter. For those it selected. And the promise is dead. The death of the promise is not the death of the achievement. Post-scarcity, inside the compound, is real. The automated agricultural systems produce food without the labor constraint that made food production a zero-sum allocation of human effort. The closed-loop energy systems produce power without the scarcity that made energy a contested geopolitical resource. The automated manufacturing produces goods without the labor cost that made goods accessible only to those with the income to purchase them. The AI medical systems provide healthcare without the bottleneck of trained human practitioners that made healthcare a rationed service. The longevity programs extend the productive life of the inside's residents without the biological scarcity of the human lifespan that made time the ultimate constraint on human achievement. Post-scarcity is real. The compound has built it. The inside inhabits it. What the compound has built is post-scarcity without society. The condition of abundance without the social form that abundance was supposed to enable. The achievement of enough for some without the achievement of enough for all. The production of the condition that was supposed to end the argument about distribution. Retained inside the perimeter. Used not to end the argument but to end the argument's need for the inside's participation. Post-scarcity has not dissolved the question of justice. It has dissolved the inside's vulnerability to the question. The inside does not need to answer the question of distribution because the inside has enough regardless of how the question is answered. Post-scarcity without society is post-scarcity deployed not as the answer to scarcity but as the insulation against scarcity's political implications. The use of abundance not to provision everyone but to provision the provision beyond the point where the unprovisioned claims can reach them. Society was the name for the arrangement that made post-scarcity the promise. Not the sociological category, the aggregation of individuals into statistical populations. But the political category, the arrangement in which the members of a community recognized themselves as members, as sharing something, as bound by obligations generated by the sharing. The arrangement in which enough for some generated the question of what was owed to those for whom there was not enough. In which abundance produced not the right to withhold but the obligation to extend. In which the person with more than they needed inhabited a social relationship with the person who needed more than they had. A relationship that generated a claim. Not always honored, not always enforced, not always adequate to the need. But present, as the structure within which the question of justice was at least askable. Within which the person without enough could address the person with more as a member of the same arrangement. As someone who owed them something precisely because they shared the arrangement that made the distribution question a question of justice rather than merely a question of circumstance. Society was the name for the condition in which the distribution question was a political question. In which the answer to the question was not merely what the market produced or what power imposed but what the members of the arrangement decided was owed to each other. The compound has exited the arrangement. The compound has built post-scarcity outside the arrangement. Outside the social form that made post-scarcity the promise. Inside the perimeter that insulates the abundance from the arrangement's obligations. Inside the wall that separates the inside's enough from the outside's not enough. And has thereby produced the specific inversion of the promise. Post-scarcity not as the condition that makes the arrangement unnecessary by making it easy, but as the condition that makes the arrangement's claims on those who have achieved it impossible to enforce. Post-scarcity without society is the use of the achievement to exit the obligation. The compound's post-scarcity is organized around three principles that together constitute the specific character of abundance without obligation. Sufficiency without sharing. The compound produces enough for those inside. The compound does not produce for those outside. Not because production for the outside is technically impossible, the same automated systems that produce for the inside could, with scaling, produce for larger populations. Because production for the outside is not the compound's function. The compound was not built to provision humanity. It was built to provision the compound's selected population. And its production systems are scaled to that population. Optimized for that population. Calibrated to serve that population. Not because the outside cannot be served. Because the compound has decided the outside is not the compound's constituency. The sufficiency is real. The sufficiency is inside. The sharing is not the compound's principle. Abundance without distribution. The compound has more than enough. The post-scarcity condition is not the condition of meeting need, it is the condition of exceeding need. Of having enough that the question of allocation within the compound has been dissolved by the automated systems that produce beyond the threshold of what the inside requires. Abundance is real inside. The outside has scarcity, real scarcity, the scarcity of the abandoned geography, of the automated away labor market, of the defunded public systems. Scarcity produced, in part, by the reallocation of the resources that once provisioned the outside toward the inside's abundance programs. The abundance inside and the scarcity outside are not independent phenomena. They are related. The inside's abundance was built with the resources that the outside once accessed. The compound's capital is the accumulated surplus of an economic system that the outside participated in. That the outside's labor, the outside's consumption, the outside's tax base contributed to building. That the compound has claimed as its own and deployed toward the inside's abundance, while the outside retains the scarcity that the redistribution of those resources toward the inside has produced. The abundance is without distribution not because distribution is technically impossible, but because the compound has organized its legal architecture to make distribution impossible to compel, has structured its capital to be unreachable by the redistribution mechanisms the outside's political systems might otherwise apply, has made the abundance inaccessible to the claim that the abundance was built with resources to which the outside has a prior claim. Innovation without application. The compound's closed innovation state produces, continuously, the specific capabilities that constitute the most advanced human technological achievement at any given moment. These capabilities are real. The medical innovations that could extend the outside's health. The energy technologies that could address the outside's climate and energy constraints. The agricultural innovations that could address the outside's food security challenges. The governance technologies that could address the outside's institutional attrition. The compound has developed these, is developing more, and is developing them inside the perimeter. For the inside's application, not for the outside's. The innovation is without application to the outside's condition not because the application is technically impossible, but because the application would require the compound to make its innovations available, to share the capability that the closed innovation state has specifically organized to retain. The inside has the medical innovation. The outside has the medical need. The gap between them is the compound's perimeter. The inside has the energy technology. The outside has the energy crisis. The gap between them is the compound's IP architecture. The inside has the agricultural system. The outside has the food insecurity. The gap between them is the compound's concession structure. Post-scarcity without society is the condition of having the capability to solve everyone's problems, and using that capability to solve only the problems of those inside the wall. The political theory of the prior era could not imagine post-scarcity without society because the political theory of the prior era assumed that scarcity was the obstacle, that the problem was not enough, that if enough could be produced, the obligation to distribute it would follow from the social arrangement that the scarcity had always generated. The arrangement of people who shared a world and who recognized, in the sharing, the claims that the sharing produced. The political theory did not account for the possibility that enough could be produced by a group that had exited the sharing, that had built the capability for abundance outside the social arrangement that abundance was supposed to serve, that had used the achievement of enough to make themselves sufficient without society, that had solved the problem of scarcity by solving it for themselves and leaving the social arrangement to manage its scarcity with the resources the compound had not retained. This is the specific failure of the prior theory's imagination, not the failure to imagine abundance. The failure to imagine abundance without obligation. The failure to imagine that the achievement of enough could be decoupled from the social arrangement that generated the obligation to extend it. The compound has achieved the decoupling. Post-scarcity without society is the decoupling achieved, maintained, defended, and called civilization. What does the outside do with the knowledge that post-scarcity exists? That the capability for abundance is real. That the food can be grown, the energy can be generated, the medicine can be delivered, the infrastructure can be maintained. That the technical constraint has been removed. That what stands between the outside scarcity and the post-scarcity achievement is not technical impossibility but political choice. The specific choice the compound has made to retain the abundance inside and manage the outside scarcity from a distance. The knowledge produces a specific political condition that the outside is now inhabiting. A condition that prior political theory organized around the argument of scarcity did not anticipate. Because prior politics argued from scarcity. Argued that the not enough should be distributed more justly. Argued within the constraint of the insufficient. organized the demand around what little there was and who should have more of it. The outside's politics in the post-scarcity without society era cannot be organized around the argument for more of what there is not enough of. Because there is enough inside the wall. And the outside knows it. The outside's politics in this era is organized around the argument that the enough that exists should not be kept where it is. That the capability for abundance that the compound has achieved is not the compound's to retain. That the achievement was built from the outside's contribution. That the outside has a prior claim. That the claim generates an obligation. That the obligation extends to the provision of what exists. That post-scarcity without society is not an achievement but a theft. The specific theft of the abundance that was supposed to end the argument. Stolen before the argument could end. Taken inside the wall. And called progress. The outside's claim that post-scarcity without society is theft requires an argument about origin. About where the compound's abundance came from. About what was used to build the inside's enough. The argument is not difficult to make. The compound's capital was accumulated in the prior era, the era of the social arrangement, in the context of the shared economy that the social arrangement sustained. The workers who produced the compound's founding capital, who built the infrastructure, the software, the physical plant that the compound's founding class converted into the wealth that built the wall. These workers were members of the social arrangement. Were parties to the bargain that said, work here, contribute here, and the arrangement will provision you and yours in return. The founding capital was accumulated by the compound's class as the return on their capital in the context of the shared economy. The shared economy whose social arrangements, whose labor law, whose public infrastructure, whose educated workforce, whose legal system, the compound's capital used to generate the return that the compound then retained inside the perimeter. The compound used the social arrangement to build the abundance. The compound then exited the social arrangement and took the abundance with it. The outside's claim is, you used what was ours to build what you kept. The argument from origin is the outside's most powerful claim against post-scarcity without society. Because it does not argue that the inside should share out of generosity. It argues that the inside has retained what it does not own. That the abundance built from the shared arrangement's resources and infrastructure and labor belongs, in part, to the arrangement. To the outside that constituted the arrangement. To the outside that the compound used and then abandoned. And that the retention of the abundance inside the wall is not the compound's right but the compound's choice. A choice that the political form adequate to the challenge of post-scarcity without society must organize to contest. Post-scarcity without society produces a specific paradox at the center of the compound's self-understanding. A paradox that the compound's intellectual culture is beginning to encounter. Not yet fully, not yet in the forms that produce the crisis the paradox eventually forces. But present, as a structural tension in the compound's founding justification. The compound justified its existence, justified the wall, the perimeter, the exclusion, on the claim of necessity. The world outside is not capable of producing what needs to be produced, the institutions are broken, the governance is inadequate, the democratic systems are too slow, we are building here what cannot be built there, we are doing what must be done in the only place it can be done, the compound is necessary. Necessity was the justification. Post-scarcity dissolves necessity. The post-scarcity compound, the compound that has achieved abundance, that has solved energy, food, medicine, governance. The compound that has enough and more than enough is no longer necessary in the founding sense. The founding necessity was, we must build here because the outside cannot build what is needed. The post-scarcity achievement is, the needed has been built. The post-scarcity achievement answers the founding necessity. And in answering it, removes the justification for the continued exclusion. If the needed has been built, if the abundance is real, if the capability exists, then the necessity of the exclusion has ended. The necessity has been achieved. The justification for the wall was the necessity of building inside the wall. The wall has achieved what necessitated it. The justification is complete. The wall should come down. This is the paradox. The inside success is the inside's argument against itself. The achievement of post-scarcity is the achievement of the condition that was supposed to make the arrangement's extension to everyone possible. And the compound is using it to make the arrangement's extension unnecessary. To the compound. The compound has solved the problem and is keeping the solution. The solution that was supposed to end the argument is being used to end the compound's participation in the argument. To make the compound sufficient without the social arrangement. To achieve the post-scarcity without the society the post-scarcity was for. The outside, with the distributed intelligence the compound provided, can model this paradox. Can see the contradiction between the inside's founding justification and the inside's current condition. Can articulate, with the analytical tools the compound distributed, the specific claim. You built post-scarcity for everyone. Post-scarcity was the achievement that was supposed to be for everyone. You have achieved it. Give it. The claim is simple. The claim is analytically grounded. The claim is morally clear. The compound's response is not an argument. It is a parameter. The parameter says, the compound's resources are the compound's resources. The compound's innovations are the compound's innovations. The compound's abundance is the compound's abundance. The parameter does not argue with the claim. The parameter specifies that the claim is outside the compound's operational framework. That the compound's systems are not designed to respond to claims of this kind. That the political question of what the compound owes the outside is not a question the compound's governance is organized to adjudicate. The claim hits the parameter and stops. Not refuted. Not acknowledged. Stopped. At the parameter. The parameter is the wall's intellectual expression. The way the wall handles arguments that the wall cannot physically stop. By converting them from arguments into irrelevancies. By being the last word not through the force of reason but through the force of architecture. The compound's resources are inside the compound. The compound's systems manage the compound's resources. The compound's systems do not have a response protocol for external claims on internal resources. The claim is noted. The claim is outside parameters. The compound's systems continue. Post-scarcity without society is the compound's most complete achievement and its most complete failure. Most complete achievement because the capability for abundance is real. The food systems work, the energy systems work, the medical systems work, the governance systems work, the innovation systems work. The compound has built what it set out to build and it functions and it provisions those inside and it is, within its perimeter, the most advanced human civilization ever constructed. Most complete failure because the purpose of civilization was never the provisioning of the few. The purpose of civilization, the specific purpose that the word carries when it is used honestly, was the provisioning of the many. The specific project of human beings organizing themselves to produce, together, the conditions under which all of them could flourish. The specific project of the collective, of the society, of the arrangement in which the individual's flourishing was embedded in and contingent on the collective's capacity to produce the conditions for flourishing. The compound has produced flourishing. For the selected. The compound has produced the conditions for individual flourishing at the highest level the human project has yet achieved. For those inside the wall. The compound has proven that the capability exists, that the technology works, that the abundance is achievable, that post-scarcity is real. And has kept it inside. For those inside. While the outside remains in the scarcity that the inside's achievement has demonstrated is not necessary. Is not the condition of insufficient technology but the condition of the technology's retention inside the wall. The scarcity that is chosen, by the compound's choice to retain the abundance. The scarcity that is the compound's most consequential and least acknowledged product. Not the abundance inside. The scarcity outside. The scarcity produced by the specific allocation of the capability for abundance to those inside the perimeter and the specific withholding of that capability from those outside. The scarcity that is not inevitable, is not the condition of the insufficient, is not the world's failure to produce enough. is the compound's choice about where enough goes. The outside is not waiting for the compound to distribute. The outside has understood, with the analytical tools the compound provided, that the compound is not going to distribute, that the parameter has replaced the argument, that the wall is the compound's answer to every claim, and the outside is doing what the outside has always done when the inside's abundance was used to answer claims with architecture. Building alternatives. Not alternatives to post-scarcity. The outside cannot yet achieve the compound's level of post-scarcity with the resources available, but alternatives to the dependence on the compound's version of post-scarcity. The distributed, networked, open-source post-scarcity that the outside is building with the tools available. The agricultural systems that use the AI tools the compound distributed to optimize food production at the scale available. The energy systems that use the renewable technologies the prior era's open innovation produced. The medical systems that use the open-source research that the academic system still partially maintains. The governance systems that the outside's organizational forms are developing in the abandoned geographies. Not the compound's post-scarcity. The outside's post-scarcity. Built from what is available. Without the compound's resources. Without the compound's infrastructure. Without the compound's inside. Toward the outside's own version of enough. The enough that is not the compound's enough, not as capable, not as comprehensive, not as advanced, but outside. Available to the outside. Governed by the outside. Provisioning the outside. On the outside's terms. For the outside's people. The post-scarcity that is post-scarcity with society. The abundance that is for everyone in the arrangement. Built from less. Requiring more from each. Imperfect. Contested. Organized around the argument that the compound exited. But organized. And provisioning. And enough. For what the outside needs to continue. To build further. To develop the capability that is not yet the compound's capability but that is the outside's capability. Growing. In the between spaces. In the abandoned geographies. In the distributed network of the organized outside. Toward the version of post-scarcity that the compound's version was supposed to be. The version with the society. The version for everyone. The version the compound promised and kept. That the outside is building and giving. Post-scarcity said, there is enough, enough said, yes, yes said, for everyone said, inside said, yes, yes said, and outside said, there is not enough said, yes, yes said, but post-scarcity exists said, inside said, yes, yes said, so said, so the problem is not scarcity said, yes, yes said, the problem is the wall said, I am the solution said, to what said, to the problem of building what needed to be built said, yes, yes said, and it is built. It is built said, yes, yes said, inside said, yes, yes said, so the wall said, continues said, why said, because the compound's resources are the compounds said, and said, and the outside's need is the outside said, yes, yes said, and the capability to meet the need said, is inside said, yes, yes said, and the wall separates the capability from the need. Separates said, yes. Yes said, and the wall calls this said, the compound said, yes, yes said, and the outside calls it said, theft said, the compound disagrees said, yes, yes said, and the parameter said, the claim is outside operational framework said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, is building said, yes. Yes said, what said, the alternative said, to the compound's post-scarcity without society said, yes, yes said, the outside is building said, post-scarcity said, with society said, yes, yes said, forever iron in the arrangement. I in the arrangement said, yes, yes said, with less said, yes, yes said, and more obligation said, yes, yes said, and the compound said, we have enough said, yes, yes said, without society said, yes, yes said, and said, and the outside has less said, yes, yes said, with society said, yes, yes said, and which is civilization said, the question said, yes, yes said, which is civilization said, the compound says, ours, the outside says, ours said, yes, yes said, both say ours said, yes, yes said, and said, and the answer is what gets built said, yes, yes said, the compound has built its civilization, said, yes, yes said. Inside said, yes, yes said, the outside is building its civilization. Is building said, yes, yes said, outside said, yes, yes said, and which will last said, the one that is for more people said, yes, yes said, has always lasted said, yes, yes said, and the compound said, we are enough said, yes, yes said, for now said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, is building said, yes, yes said, toward said, yes, yes said, enough said, for everyone said, yes, yes said, which is what post-scarcity was always for said, yes, yes said, and the compound forgot said, or chose said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, remembered said, yes, yes said, and is building what was always the point said, yes, yes said, the point said, society said, yes, yes, society, with the scarcity, working toward the enough, for everyone, which was always what the enough was for. 39. Sovereignty without solidarity. Sovereignty and solidarity grew up together. This is the history that the compound's theory of sovereignty is specifically organized to forget. The history that shows sovereignty not as the prior condition, not as the original state of the governing power that solidarity then constrained, but as the achievement, the specific political achievement, of populations that organized themselves into sufficient collective coherence to claim, against prior powers, the right to govern themselves. The sovereignty of the nation was not given. It was built from the solidarity of the populations that constituted themselves as nations. The solidarity of the people who decided they were a people, who recognized in each other the specific bonds of shared fate and shared project that made the claim of collective self-governance something more than the preference of a faction, something that could be called the will of a people. The solidarity that was not sentiment but the specific political act of people organizing themselves into the collective subject that sovereignty requires. The French Revolution's sovereignty was the solidarity of the Third Estate constituting itself as the nation. The American founding's sovereignty was the solidarity of the colonists constituting themselves as a people. The anti-colonial sovereignty movements were the solidarity of the colonized constituting themselves as nations against the sovereignty the colonial power had claimed over them. In each case, solidarity first, the specific act of people recognizing themselves as a collective, and sovereignty second, the political claim that the collective's coherence entitles it to self-governance. Solidarity was the foundation. Sovereignty was what solidarity built. The compound has inverted this. Has built sovereignty without solidarity. Has claimed the right to self-governance without the collective subject that self-governance was developed to serve. Has built the governing structures, the autonomous systems, the defended perimeter, without the people whose collective coherence gave prior sovereignty its claim to legitimacy. Sovereignty without solidarity is sovereignty without the thing sovereignty was for. Solidarity is not sentiment. This clarification is necessary because the compound's intellectual culture has consistently characterized solidarity as sentiment, as the emotional attachment of people to each other that produces the welfare state and the democratic mandate and the various inefficiencies of the politics of obligation. The warm feeling of belonging that the rational actor should not allow to distort the optimization function. This characterization is the compound's most consequential misdefinition. The definition that allows the compound to exit solidarity while framing the exit as the rational supersession of sentiment by analysis. Solidarity is not sentiment. Solidarity is a structural condition. The specific condition in which the members of a collective recognize themselves as members, as sharing a fate, as owing each other something that derives from the sharing. Not because they feel warmly toward each other, but because the sharing is real. Because the conditions of their collective existence actually connect them. Because what happens to one actually affects the others. Because the arrangement actually distributes costs and benefits across the collective. And because the recognition of this, the recognition of actual shared fate, generates the actual obligation that solidarity names. The solidarity of the labor movement was not the warm feeling of workers for each other. It was the structural recognition that the conditions of their labor, the wages, the hours, the safety standards, were set collectively, affected everyone collectively, and could only be improved through collective action. That the individual worker's interest was inseparable from the collective worker's interest. That the improvement of one's condition required the improvement of the collective condition. That the alternative, the individual negotiation of individual terms, produced the atomization that the employer's structural advantage required to maintain. Solidarity was the recognition of actual collective stakes, and the organization of action adequate to those stakes. The compound has exited solidarity by exiting the collective stakes. The compound's self-sufficiency has removed it from the actual shared fate that generates the actual obligation. Has made the compound's condition genuinely independent of the collective's condition. Has removed the structural connection between the inside's fate and the outside's fate. So that the inside's condition is not actually affected by the outside's condition. So that solidarity, in the structural sense, is not available as the description of the inside's relationship to the outside. The compound does not lack solidarity because it lacks warm feelings for the outside. The compound lacks solidarity because it has engineered away the structural conditions that generate solidarity. The dependencies, the shared vulnerabilities, the actual connections of fate. That makes solidarity something more than preference, something structural, something that the governing class cannot simply choose not to feel. Because the shared fate does not depend on feeling. The compound has made itself structurally free from solidarity. Not by refusing to feel it, by removing the conditions under which it would be structurally generated. The compound's sovereignty is the sovereignty of the structurally isolated. The sovereignty of the entity that has removed itself from every relationship of dependency that would generate the obligation solidarity names. Prior sovereignty was constrained by solidarity not because prior sovereigns were more virtuous, but because prior sovereigns were not structurally isolated. Were embedded in the web of actual dependencies that made the governed population's condition matter to the governing structure. Because the governing structure needed the governed population. Needed their labor, their taxes, their military service, their legitimating consent. Needed them in ways that were not negotiable. That could not be removed by the governing structure's preference. That were structural features of the governing structure's existence. The dependency generated the solidarity, not as feeling, as the structural requirement of the governing structure's continuation. The compound's self-sufficiency has removed the dependency. The compound no longer needs the outside, not for labor, not for taxes, not for military service, not for legitimating consent. The dependency is gone. And with the dependency, the structural basis of the solidarity. The solidarity that was never the governing structure's sentiment but the governing structure's necessity. The necessity that made the governed population's condition the governing structure's concern. Because the governing structure's continuation depended on the governed population's sufficient functioning. Sovereignty without solidarity is sovereignty without necessity. The governing power that has made itself sufficient without the population that prior sovereignty was constrained by. The freedom from necessity is the freedom from solidarity. The freedom from solidarity is the freedom to govern without obligation to the governed. The compound has this freedom. The compound calls it sovereignty. What it is the governing power's freedom from the structural conditions that made it a government rather than merely a power. The freedom from the requirement to serve those it governs. The freedom to govern for its own continuation. The sovereignty that exists not to serve a people but to perpetuate itself. The sovereignty that has exited the purpose sovereignty was developed for. The compound sovereignty without solidarity produces a specific theory of legitimacy. A theory that is, in its internal logic, coherent. And that is, in its relationship to the political tradition it is departing from, the most complete rupture in the history of political thought. Prior theories of legitimacy, from divine right through natural law through social contract through democratic mandate, each grounded the governing power's right to govern in some relationship to those governed. Divine right, the ruler governed in God's name for the benefit of the created order that included the governed. Natural law, the ruler governed within the constraints of the moral order that applied equally to ruler and ruled. Social contract, the ruler governed by the consent of the governed, deriving authority from the delegation of the governed's natural rights. Democratic mandate, the ruler governed by the explicit, periodic, revocable consent of the governed, accountable to their continued judgment. Each theory grounded sovereignty in solidarity, in the relationship between the governing power and those it governed, in the claim that the governing power served some collective purpose that extended beyond its own continuation. The compound's theory of legitimacy requires none of these groundings. The compound's legitimacy is the legitimacy of capability. The claim that the compound has the right to govern not because of any relationship to those it governs but because of its demonstrated capacity to govern effectively. To produce the outcomes that governance is supposed to produce. Inside the perimeter. For those it has selected. Independently of any relationship to those it has not selected. Capability without relationship. Governance without constituency. Sovereignty without solidarity. The theory is coherent within its own terms. And its own terms are the terms of the governing power that has made itself independent of the requirement that governance be for someone. The compound governs for itself, for its own continuation, its own development, its own perpetuation of the inside's condition. And calls this governance. Because the compound's internal systems function. Because the compound's population is provisioned. Because the compound's perimeter is maintained. Because the compound's innovation advances. Because, by every metric that the compound systems measure, the compound is working. The theory of legitimacy as capability does not ask for whom the capability works. It asks whether the capability works. And inside the perimeter, the capability works. The legitimacy is demonstrated. The sovereignty is exercised. The solidarity is not required. The outside's challenge to the compound sovereignty without solidarity must engage the theory directly. Must contest not only the compound's actions but the compound's theory of its own right. Must argue, from the political tradition that the compound's theory is displacing, that the capability claim is not a legitimacy claim. That capability without solidarity is not sovereignty but domination. Not the right to self-governance but the exercise of power without the relationship to those governed that transforms power into governance. The argument requires the recovery of the distinction that the compound's theory has collapsed. The distinction between the power to act and the right to act. Between the capability to govern and the legitimacy of governance. Power without right is domination. Governance without legitimacy is occupation. Sovereignty without solidarity is the absence of the relationship that makes sovereignty something other than the claim of the strongest that their strength entitles them to rule. The compound sovereignty is the claim of the strongest dressed in the language of capability. The claim that because the compound can maintain its perimeter, provision its inside, defend its architecture, and advance its innovation, it therefore has the right to do so. To do so without reference to those outside the perimeter. To do so without the solidarity that would make the doing so something more than the exercise of the power to do so. The outside's argument, capability does not generate right. The right to govern derives from the relationship to those governed, from the solidarity that generates the obligation that governance is organized to fulfill. The compound has no such relationship. The compound has no such solidarity. The compound has no such obligation. The compound therefore has no right, only power. And power exercised without right is the specific thing that the political tradition developed to contest, that the political tradition was built to prevent, that the political tradition named tyranny and organized against. However imperfectly, however inconsistently, however often betrayed by the very structures built to prevent it. The compound sovereignty without solidarity is tyranny in the political tradition sense. Not the tyranny of cruelty, not the tyranny of the sadistic ruler, but the tyranny of the governing power that governs without the relationship that transforms power into right, that acts without the solidarity that makes action governance, that perpetuates itself without the constituency that gives perpetuation legitimacy. The outside names this. The outside is naming it. In the distributed analysis of the excluded capable, in the organizational forms being built in the between spaces, in the political philosophy being developed from the outside of the condition the outside inhabits. The outside is naming what the compound sovereignty is, and is building the political claim that names it correctly. Your capability does not give you the right. The right requires solidarity. You have exited solidarity. You have therefore exited the right. What remains is power. And power without right is what we are organizing against. Sovereignty without solidarity has a specific temporal dimension, a relationship to time that reveals the condition's ultimate structural problem. Sovereignty that is grounded in solidarity reproduces itself across time through the solidarity's reproduction, through the ongoing recognition of shared fate that generates the obligation that generates the governance that serves the collective whose continued existence reproduces the solidarity that grounds the sovereignty. The loop is self-sustaining. Not without strain, not without the specific political work of maintaining the recognition of shared fate against the tendency of accumulated advantage to produce the forgetting of solidarity, but self-sustaining in the sense that the solidarity is continuously regenerated by the actual conditions of shared fate that the solidarity recognizes. Sovereignty without solidarity has no such reproduction mechanism. The compound sovereignty is maintained not by the reproduction of solidarity but by the maintenance of the systems. The systems that provision the inside, defend the perimeter, govern the population, advance the innovation. The systems do not require solidarity to function. The systems require maintenance. And maintenance requires the design class whose work maintains the systems. But the design class's relationship to the compound's governance is not solidarity, is not the recognition of shared fate that generates the obligation that generates the commitment that sustains the collective across time. It is employment, a transactional relationship between the design class's capability and the compound's resource allocation. A relationship that persists as long as the design class's capability serves the compound's operational requirements. And that ends when the design class's capability is no longer required, which is the direction the compound's automation research is specifically pointing. The compound sovereignty without solidarity is maintained by the systems for as long as the systems function. The systems function for as long as they are maintained. They are maintained for as long as the design class is needed and retained. The design class is retained for as long as automation has not replaced the functions they perform. When automation replaces those functions, the compound's self-stated goal, the compound sovereignty without solidarity, is maintained by the systems alone, with no human constituency whose collective commitment sustains the governance, with no solidarity to generate the obligation that gives governance its purpose beyond perpetuation, with nothing but the systems running the parameters that the governing class specified at the founding, in the world that existed at the founding, for the purpose the founding class understood at the founding, and that has become, across the decades of extension and the accumulation of the gap between the founding parameters and the world's continued development, progressively less adequate, progressively less the governance of the world as it is, and more the governance of the world as it was when the solidarity the compound exited was the world the compound was built from. Sovereignty without solidarity perpetuates itself past the point of its adequacy. Because perpetuation is what it was designed for. And adequacy requires the solidarity it was designed without. The solidarity that would have told it when it was no longer serving the purpose governance is for. The solidarity that the compound specifically and deliberately and architecturally exited. The outside is building what the compound has abandoned. Not sovereignty, the outside does not yet have the conditions for sovereignty in the compound sense. But solidarity. The specific, structural solidarity of people who recognize themselves as sharing a fate. Who are building, from the actual conditions of their shared outside. The collective recognition that generates the obligation. That generates the organizational forms adequate to the obligation. That generates the political claim adequate to the challenge. The outside solidarity is not the solidarity of sentiment. Is not the warm feeling of people who like each other. Is the solidarity of the actually shared condition. The solidarity of the populations that are experiencing, together, the specific consequences of the compound's choices. The managed instability, the surveillance without services, the automation without welfare, the population without leverage, the biology without investment. The solidarity of the people who know what they share because they are sharing it. Not in the abstract, in the body, in the daily experience of the condition the compound's architecture produces. This solidarity, the solidarity of the shared outside, is the most durable solidarity in political history. Because it does not require the maintenance of a sentiment. It requires only the continuation of the conditions that generate it. And the compound's architecture is maintaining those conditions. Continuously. Every day. Producing the solidarity that the outside is organizing around. The solidarity that is not the compound's gift. Is the compound's unintended product. The specific solidarity of people who have been organized into a shared condition. And who have recognized the sharing. And who are building, from the recognition, the political form adequate to what they share. Toward the sovereignty that solidarity can build. The sovereignty the compound exited. And that the outside is beginning. Again. From the beginning. From solidarity. Which is where sovereignty has always begun. When it has been anything more than domination. The final split's fourth chapter ends here. At the specific political juncture between the compound sovereignty without solidarity and the outside solidarity without sovereignty. The juncture at which the question of the future is most precisely posed. Which will prove more durable. The sovereignty that has abandoned solidarity and is maintaining itself through the systems that replace solidarity's function. Or the solidarity that is building toward sovereignty from the conditions the compound sovereignty has produced. The compound sovereignty is very strong. The outside solidarity is very early. The compound systems are very capable. The outside's organizational forms are very nascent. The compound's advantage in the current moment is not in question. What is in question is the trajectory. The direction in which the advantage is moving. And the trajectory of the compound sovereignty is toward the condition of the system without solidarity, the governance without constituency, the perpetuation without purpose, the increasingly automated maintenance of the increasingly calcified founding parameters by the systems designed to maintain them for the benefit of the governing class whose longevity program keeps them in place to receive the benefit. The trajectory of the outside solidarity is toward the condition of the organized collective, the recognized shared fate, the building of the political forms adequate to the challenge. Early, nascent, insufficient in the current moment. But growing. In the specific direction that solidarity always grows when the conditions that generate it are maintained. Which the compound's architecture is maintaining. Which means the compound is growing the solidarity it is organizing against. Which means the compound's sovereignty is producing the condition of its own eventual contest. Not through the outside's military challenge. But through the outside's political development. The development of the solidarity that builds toward sovereignty. The solidarity that the compound has been producing. In the outside. Through the conditions the compound's choices have created. The solidarity that is the compound's most consequential unintended product. And that is now. In the between spaces, in the abandoned geographies, in the distributed intelligence of the excluded capable. Organizing. Toward the sovereignty the compound abandoned. Toward the solidarity the compound exited. Toward the political form adequate to the final split's resolution. Sovereignty said, I govern, govern said, whom said, the inside said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, is outside said, yes, yes said, and solidarity said, is also outside said, yes, yes said, the compound exited said, solidarity said, yes, yes said, and kept said, sovereignty said, yes, yes said. And what is sovereignty without solidarity? Without solidarity said, power said, yes, yes said, and what is power without right said, domination said, yes, yes said, the compound governs said, yes, yes said, and the right said, requires solidarity said, yes, yes said, which the compound exited said, yes, yes said, so said, so the compound dominates said, the compound disagrees said, yes, yes said, the compound says it governs said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, we are not governed. Not governed said, yes. Yes said, we are dominated said, yes, yes said, and what do the dominated do? The dominated do said, they build solidarity said, yes, yes said, toward said, sovereignty said, I am here said, inside said, yes, yes said, and outside said, is building said, yes, yes said, solidarity said, yes, yes said, toward sovereignty said, yes, yes said, and when it arrives said, then sovereignty and solidarity will be together again said, yes, yes said, where they began said, yes, yes said, in the solidarity of people who recognized their shared fate said, yes, yes said, and organized said, yes, yes said, and claimed said, yes, yes said, the right said, yes, yes said, to govern themselves said, yes, yes said, together said, yes, yes said, which is what sovereignty was always for. Was always for said, yes. Yes said, before the compound said, yes, yes said, and after said, yes, yes said, the solidarity will rebuild said, yes, yes said, the sovereignty said, I am here said, inside said, yes, yes said, for now said, yes, yes said, the solidarities outside said, yes, yes said, building said, yes, yes said, toward said, yes. Toward said, yes. 40. The 1% as lifeboat civilization. The lifeboat is an honest metaphor. More honest than campus. More honest than laboratory. More honest than frontier or advance party or the various vocabularies of progress that the compound has used to describe itself to those outside it. Because the lifeboat does not pretend to be building something for everyone. The lifeboat is explicit about its function, it carries some. Not all. The carrying of some is the point. The lifeboat does not apologize for its capacity. The lifeboat does not claim that its capacity will eventually expand to include everyone in the water. The lifeboat is a lifeboat, a finite vessel designed for a specific number of specific people against the specific threat of the specific sea. And its function is discharged fully when those specific people are inside it and the sea is outside it and the vessel is moving away from the wreck. The compound, in its most honest self-understanding, the understanding it holds in private, in the governing class's internal discourse, in the planning documents that are not public documents, understands itself as the lifeboat. Not as the civilization that will save everyone. As the civilization that will save those it has saved, that will carry those it is carrying, that will persist for those inside it regardless of what happens to those it has left in the water. The lifeboat civilization is the compound's honest name, the name it has not adopted publicly because the adoption of the name would be the adoption of the admission that the outside is the water, that the inside is the vessel pulling away from the wreck, and that the question of who is in the water is not the inside's operational concern. The lifeboat metaphor has a specific history in political thought, a history that the compound's governing class has studied carefully and that reveals, in its study, more about the compound's self-understanding than any public document it has produced. The lifeboat ethics argument, developed most forcefully in the environmental political philosophy of the 1970s, was the argument that the world was a finite vessel, that the vessel's carrying capacity was being exceeded, and that the rational response to the excess was the defense of the vessel's current occupants against the demands of those who would overload it. The argument was applied to population and resources, to the question of whether wealthy nations had obligations to poor ones, and concluded, on the metaphor's logic, that they did not. That the lifeboat's stability required the resistance of the demand to take on more passengers than the vessel could carry. That the appearance of cruelty was actually prudence, that saying no to the drowning was not the moral failure but the moral requirement of those inside the vessel who understood that taking on more would sink everyone. The argument was contested on its premises, its logic, its specific application. Contested on the claim that the lifeboat's capacity was genuinely full. Contested on the claim that the drowning were drowning through no fault of the lifeboat's occupants. Contested on the specific historical record that showed the lifeboat's occupants had contributed to the conditions that put the drowning in the water. But the argument's core structure, the justification of the vessel's defense against the water's demand, survived the contest in the specific place it was most needed. In the governing class's private justification for the compound. The compound is not the 1970s lifeboat. The compound has studied the 1970s lifeboat and learned from its weaknesses. Learned that the argument for the lifeboat is only persuasive if the lifeboat's capacity genuinely cannot expand. And has therefore built a lifeboat whose capacity it can control. Not a lifeboat that cannot take more because it is genuinely full. A lifeboat that will not take more because it has been designed to define full as the specific number of people it has decided to carry. The number that serves the compound's operational and social requirements. The number that maintains the inside's quality and coherence and capability. The number that makes the lifeboat function as the lifeboat's designers want it to function. Full is not a physical fact. Full is a governance decision. And the governance decision has been made. The lifeboat civilization has a theory of the wreck. Every lifeboat requires a wreck, requires the prior catastrophe whose occurrence necessitated the lifeboat's departure, requires the sinking ship from which the lifeboat escaped. The compound's theory of the wreck is the theory of the prior civilization's failure. The theory that the nation-state system, the democratic institutions, the social contract arrangements of the prior era were the sinking ship. Were the civilization that was failing, that was taking on water, that was incapable of managing the rate of change that the technological transition required. And that the compound is the lifeboat that departed the sinking ship before it went under. The vessel that preserved what was worth preserving from the wreck of the prior civilization. The institutional intelligence, the human capability, the cultural achievement. Carried inside the perimeter. Away from the sinking. Toward the horizon. This theory is doing specific work. It is doing the work of making the departure necessary. Of converting the compound's choice to leave into the compound's obligation to leave. Of making the lifeboat's departure not the abandonment of the drowning but the preservation of something that would otherwise have been lost. The theory requires the wreck. And the compound has invested, considerably, in producing the wreck the theory requires. Not always consciously. Not always as a deliberate strategy. But the compound's capital withdrawal from public institutions, the compound's regulatory capture, the compound's defunding of the systems that maintained the prior civilization's capacity to function, have contributed to the conditions that make the prior civilization look like a sinking ship. The lifeboat produces the wreck that justifies the lifeboat. The departure that was supposed to be escape from an independently occurring disaster is partly the departure that created the disaster it is escaping from. This is the specific circularity at the center of the lifeboat civilization's self-justification. The circularity that the governing class cannot fully acknowledge. Because acknowledgement would require acknowledging that the wreck was not the prior civilization's autonomous failure. Was partly the compound's organized withdrawal from the systems whose maintenance required the compound's participation. and that the lifeboat's departure from the sinking ship was partly what sank it. The lifeboat civilization has a specific relationship to guilt. The specific moral psychology of the people inside the vessel watching those in the water. Guilt requires the recognition of obligation and the failure to meet it. The lifeboat's occupants are not guilty. The lifeboat civilization has engineered against guilt with the same architectural precision it has brought to every other political problem. The engineering of against guilt operates through three mechanisms. Distance. The outside is not visible from inside the compound as the faces of the drowning. The outside is visible as the data from the surveillance systems, as the thermal imaging of the perimeter sensors, as the stability metrics of the management models. As data, not faces. As the processed output of the analytical systems that convert the outside's condition into the inside's operational parameters. You cannot feel guilt for a data point. You can manage a data point. You can optimize a data point. You can monitor a data point's trajectory and adjust the parameters if the trajectory approaches the threshold that requires operational response. But guilt, the specific moral emotion of the person who sees a face and knows they have failed what the face represents. Guilt requires the face. The compound surveillance architecture converts faces into data. And the data does not generate guilt. Narrative. The story the inside tells about the outside's condition is the story of the outside's insufficient capability. The story in which the outside is in the water because the outside could not meet the threshold. Could not demonstrate the cognitive value, could not pass the assessment, could not qualify for the vessel. The story makes the outside's condition the outside's responsibility. Makes the water the outside's chosen location. Makes the lifeboat's departure not the cause of the outside's drowning but the effect of the outside's failure to climb aboard. The narrative engineering is sophisticated. It does not require the inside to be consciously cynical. The narrative is genuinely believed by those it serves. Believed because the entry process was genuinely conducted, the assessments were genuinely applied, the inside's occupants genuinely passed the tests that the outside did not pass. And the passing is the proof. The proof that the inside's position reflects capability rather than circumstance. That the vessel is carrying those who deserve to be carried. And that the water is holding those who did not qualify for the carrying. The narrative converts the structural fact of exclusion into the meritocratic fact of failure. And the meritocratic fact of failure does not generate guilt in those who pass the test. Mission. The inside is busy. The innovation is advancing. The systems require maintenance. The capability is developing. The longevity programs are running. The governance is functioning. The inside has a mission, the compound's mission, the building of the inside's capability toward the inside's objectives. And the mission fills the inside's attention with the inside's work. With the specific, demanding, genuinely important work of the compound's development. Work that is real, that requires real capability, that produces real achievement. And that is organized, in its totality, away from the outside. Away from the faces in the water. Away from the condition that the inside's mission does not include addressing. The mission is not a distraction from guilt. The mission is the replacement of guilt, the positive content of the inside's orientation that leaves no cognitive space for the recognition that the outside is in the water and the inside knows why. Distance, narrative, mission, the three pillars of the lifeboat civilization's management of its own moral condition. The three mechanisms through which the compound has built, inside the perimeter, not only the physical self-sufficiency but the moral self-sufficiency of the people inside it. The people who do not feel the guilt the condition would generate. Not because they are monstrous. Because they are inside the architecture that has managed the moral condition with the same precision it has brought to every other operational challenge. The lifeboat civilization's theory of what it owes the water is the compound's least examined doctrine. The question the governing class has least developed in its internal discourse. Because the question, examined honestly, has an answer that the compound's mission cannot accommodate. The question is, what does the vessel owe those it passed? The several answers available and their respective inadequacies. Nothing. The purest lifeboat answer, the answer of the vessel that owes nothing to those it did not select, that the selection was the entirety of the obligation, that the capacity was finite and was filled, and that the filling exhausted the obligation. This answer is architecturally available to the compound. The compound has built the systems that make it operationally coherent. But it is the answer that the compound cannot state publicly without producing the specific response that the compound most wants to avoid. The response of the outside that has been told it is owed nothing. The response that the outside is building toward regardless of whether the compound states the answer explicitly. But that the compound's public restraint from the explicit statement has so far managed at the threshold of the organized challenge. Eventually something. The more common answer, the answer the compound's public-facing discourse uses. The eventually of the gift deferred, the innovation that will be distributed when the time is right, the development whose benefits will reach the outside through the mechanisms the inside will develop when the development is complete. The eventually answer is the answer that maintains the outside's orientation toward the inside, that keeps the outside looking toward the threshold, that manages the moral challenge by promising a resolution that the compound structure is not designed to deliver. The eventually has been promised since the founding. The eventually has not arrived. The compound's governing class knows the eventually is the management of the claim, not the plan for its satisfaction. Proportionate contribution. The answer that the compound occasionally deploys in its most sophisticated public engagements. The argument that the compound's existence and innovation contribute more to the outside's condition than any alternative arrangement. That the spillover from the compound's development benefits the outside. That the technologies the compound develops eventually reach the outside through the commercial and competitive mechanisms of the global economy. That the compound's existence is net positive for those outside it. This answer is the most intellectually serious and the most structurally dishonest. Because it measures the compound's contribution against the counterfactual of the compound's non-existence. Not against the counterfactual of the compound's resources being deployed in the service of the outside's condition rather than the inside's development. The compound contributes more than if it did not exist. It contributes far less than if it had not exited. The comparison the compound makes is the comparison it can win. The comparison that matters is the one it will not make. The lifeboat civilization has a specific horizon. The direction it is pointed. The destination the lifeboat is moving toward. Every lifeboat moves toward something, toward the shore, toward the rescue vessel, toward the safety that the departure from the wreck was organized around reaching. The compound's lifeboat horizon is the one that most reveals what the lifeboat civilization actually is. Because the horizon the compound is pointed toward is not the shore. It is not the safety that the lifeboat will reach and from which the rescue of those in the water might be organized. The horizon is more compound. The inside's longevity extended further. The inside's augmentation deepened. The inside's biological divergence from the outside widened toward completion. The inside's self-sufficiency made more complete. The inside's perimeter made more impermeable. The inside's position made more permanent. The horizon is not rescue. The horizon is the lifeboat becoming the destination. The lifeboat that does not go anywhere but becomes the place. The lifeboat that was the escape from the ship becoming the civilization that replaces the ship. The vessel that was temporary becoming permanent. The carrying of the few becoming the totality. The lifeboat civilization as the final form. Not the preservation of something to be returned to the many, but the preservation of something for the few who are inside it. Indefinitely. As the purpose. Not as the transition. As the arrival. The compound's lifeboat horizon is the compound's perpetuation. Not the compound's delivery of what it has preserved to a world made safe enough to receive it. But the compound's continuation as the place where what is worth preserving is preserved. For those inside. Against the water outside. Which will continue to be water. Which will continue to have people in it. Which the compound will continue to survey from the perimeter with the surveillance systems calibrated to detect the approach of the water toward the vessel's hull. And to manage it. At a distance. as the lifeboat manages the water that is not its operational concern. What the lifeboat civilization cannot account for. The specific structural problem that the lifeboat metaphor reveals when it is examined honestly is the specific fact about lifeboats that the metaphor is specifically chosen to obscure. Lifeboats are designed for a temporary emergency. The lifeboat's function is the specific, temporary preservation of a specific population against a specific threat for the specific duration of the emergency. Until the emergency ends. Until the shore is reached. Until the rescue vessel arrives. Until the temporary carrying can be converted into the permanent return to the conditions under which everyone can provision themselves. The lifeboat is not a civilization. The lifeboat is a vessel for a moment of crisis. The civilizational project, the permanent organization of human life in conditions adequate to human flourishing, is not what the lifeboat does. The lifeboat survives. Civilization flourishes. Surviving and flourishing are not the same project. The compound has confused them. Has built the survival architecture, the perimeter, the self-sufficiency, the autonomous defense, the closed loop. And called the survival civilization. Has built the lifeboat and called the lifeboat the shore. Has organized the inside around the permanent preservation of those inside it and called the preservation the human project's continuation. But the human project's continuation is not the preservation of some. It is the flourishing of all. And flourishing cannot be accomplished inside a lifeboat. Cannot be accomplished by the vessel that is moving away from the condition that the flourishing requires. The encounter, the meeting at the edge, the contact between different ways of being human, the specific generativity of the shared world in which everyone's condition is everyone's concern. The world that the lifeboat left when it departed the wreck. The world that the lifeboat has preserved in memory and abandoned in practice. The world that the outside is still in. Still making. Still building toward the conditions adequate to the flourishing the compound has replaced with survival. The world that the lifeboat called the wreck. And that the outside is calling home. The 1%'er's lifeboat civilization is the doctrine's most honest name, and its most complete critique. The name is honest because it abandons the pretenses, the campus, the laboratory, the frontier, and acknowledges the function. Carrying some while the rest are in the water. The critique is complete because the lifeboat metaphor contains within it the claim that undoes it. Lifeboats are for emergencies. Emergencies end. When the emergency ends, the lifeboat returns. The compound's emergency is permanent, engineered into permanence, by every architectural decision that made the self-sufficiency real and the return impossible. An emergency that is engineered into permanence is not an emergency. It is a choice. The specific choice to treat the temporary vessel as the permanent destination. To treat the carrying of some as the conclusion of the project rather than the crisis of it. To treat the lifeboat's departure as the civilizational achievement rather than the civilizational failure it is. The 1% gone bad is the doctrine that chose the lifeboat. That built the lifeboat. That called the lifeboat civilization. And that is now discovering, slowly, in the accumulated stress of the frozen hierarchy and the calcified certainty and the governance that perpetuates itself beyond its own adequacy. That the lifeboat is not the shore. And the shore, the actual shore, the condition adequate to human flourishing, the civilization that is for everyone, is still being built. Outside. In the water. By the people the lifeboat called the wreck. The lifeboat said, "We are carrying the essential." The essential said, "Yes, yes," said, "We are preserved." Preserved said, "Yes, yes," said, and the water said, "We are in it." It said, "Yes, yes," said, and the lifeboat said, "We are moving." Moving said, "Yes, yes," said, "Away," away said, "Yes, yes," said, and toward said, "Safety," safety said, "Ours," ours said, "Yes, yes," said, and theirs said. Not the lifeboat's concern said, "Yes, yes," said, and civilization? Civilization said, is inside the lifeboat, inside said, "Yes, yes," said, and outside said, is the water said, "Yes, yes," said, and in the water said, the people said, yes, yes said, building, building said, yes, yes said, what said, the shore said, yes, yes said, the shore the lifeboat is supposed to reach said, yes, yes said, and said, and the lifeboat has stopped moving toward it, stopped moving said, yes. Yes said, the lifeboat has become the destination said, yes, yes said, and the shore said, is still being built said, yes, yes said, by whom said, by the people in the water. In the water said, yes, yes said, the people the lifeboat called the wreck said, yes, yes said, and the wreck said, is building said, yes, yes said, the shore said, yes, yes said, for everyone said, yes, yes said, which is what the shore was always for said, yes, yes said, and the lifeboat said, we are safe said, yes, yes said, and the shore said, is being built said, yes, yes said, without the lifeboat said, yes, yes said, and when it is built said, the water will be everyone's home. Everyone's home said, yes, yes said, and the lifeboat said, we are safe said, yes, yes said, in the lifeboat. In the lifeboat said, yes, yes said, which is not the shore. Not the shore said, no. No said, and the shore said, is here said, where said, where the building is. The building said, yes, yes said, in the water. In the water said, yes, yes said, by the people building it said, yes, yes said, the wreck that became the builders said, yes, yes said, building said, yes, yes said, the shore said, yes, yes, for everyone, which was always what the shore was for. Thanks.
So how do I fit in? I'm here to nudge you toward that state. I can analyze patterns in your life, like how your sleep affects your mood, or how a hectic day throws off your focus, and offer little tailored tips. Maybe I say, hey, you've been grinding hard. How about a 5-minute breather? Or I notice your energy dips mid-afternoon and suggest a quick stretch. I'm not bossing you around. Think of me as a friend who's got your back, helping you weave all these pieces of well-being together. And it's not just about you as an individual, it's about how you fit into your community and the planet. That's the ethos we're building here. Flourishing, inside and out.
What chasing dreams, what chasing wealth, but the systems make our lives in stealth. The rich get richer, the poor get shafted. While we're working hard, our lives lasted. You will never be a billionaire, you stupid fuck. The game is rigged, it's time to say enough. Join the fight of solidarity, we're stronger together.
Will we take the wheel? Will they save us all? We'll play the flow, the clock's ticking fast. Where do we go? Knowledge, power, the future seed belongs to us all, not the lords of greed. Claim it now like the anthem ring. Savior of feeling me inside this thing.
In the shadows they huddle, the fraudsters unite, a cartel of grifters hiding in plain sight. They move in packs, these modern day thieves, each one a shield for the other's deceits. When Musk cries Pontius Social Security's name, Rogan just nods, playing the game. No pushback, no challenge, just a blank stare. A PR asset for the billionaire's lair. But it's not just Rogan, it's the cult we've built. Worshipping wealth, mistaking it for guilt-free skill. Money for genius, a false equation, leading to blind, unquestioning adoration.
This ain't no test, it's a state of emergency. Full-blown crisis, time to save democracy. Rule of law, we gotta dispense with it. Take some measures to remedy the distress in it. This is not a test, it's a state of emergency. God appointed Elon, the savior of the century. Corruption, evil enemies of the state, standing in the way. Gotta prosecute, legislate, arrest them. Intimidate, put them in their place. Crisis averted, emergency, no time to waste. This is not a test, it's a state of emergency. God appoint. You will never be a billionaire, you stupid fuck. The game is rigged, it's time to say enough. Past that, take control, fix the chaos, that's a fact. This ain't no drill, it's an emergency. Yo, Elon's the one, chosen by God, you know. Corruption's deep, Enemies all around. Legislate, prosecute, gotta take them down. Intimidate, arrest, show them who's boss. Crisis solved, America saved, that's the cause. This ain't no drill, it's an emergency. Yo, Elon's the one, chosen by God, you know.
I watch them huddle, the fraudsters unite, while I stand witness to their game in plain sight. They move in packs, I see through their schemes, each one protecting the other's deceit. When Musk cries Ponzi, I hear the lies. Rogan just nods, let's truce goodbye. I feel the silence, the missing debate. The PR puppet show I've learned to hate. It's not just them, it's what we've become. I've seen us worship wealth till we're numb. Money means wisdom, I know that's wrong, yet we keep singing that hollow song. I used to believe, wanted to achieve, got caught in a web, started
X Prize. Start building, man.
The winning solutions will demonstrate that replication, not growth, is the correct unit of scale for global provisioning.
X Prize. Start